Hi everyone, and welcome to another piano comparison here at Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Today we have the ES520 and the ES920. These are Kawai's newest portable stage units. They are quite similar, but there are some very specific differences that you should know about before making your decision, and that's exactly what we're going to explore in this video today. Each of these have separate full-length reviews that you may want to check out. But if you're really mostly interested in what those differences are, both in terms of spec as well as what it sounds like, you might want to check this video right here out. If it's the first time to the channel, we would really appreciate if you did hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're kept up to date every single time we come out with a new review. So without further ado, let's explore the 520 versus the 920 right away. So as I said in the intro, this is not going to be a super deep dive into either one of these. Rather, we're going to stay focused on what the differences are between the 520 and the 920. These instruments are relatively close in price. I'm actually a little surprised that there isn't more of a gap. It's not that I think the ES520 is too expensive. It's more like I think the 920 could probably be a few $100s more than it is and still do quite well in the marketplace. It still sits underneath the FP90X. It still sits nicely above the FP60X. And anyway, you know, Kawai's priced them where they are. So we're going to evaluate it based on the price spread that they've defined, which, you know, in most markets is going to be around $300. So on the 920, we have the Harmonic Imaging XL chip. This is the same one that you are going to find right up until you get into the SKEX rendering engine with Kawai. So the XL chip is going to appear on, I believe, like the CA59. I think you start to get it, well, really for anything except the rendering. That's what the XL chip is for the rest of the 79 and the 99 as well. So with the exception of that rendering, it pretty much is their top engine. It's the fastest chip. It's the most complex tone algorithm that they make. On the 520, we have progressive harmonic imaging, which is what you see in the rest of kind of the middle of the pack Kawai products. So we're going to do back-to-backs on the piano sound and some of the other sounds and see if we can actually hear a difference. How we're capturing sound is both stereo line outs from these instruments as well as stereo microphones, so you're going to be able to hear back and forth both what they sound like direct and what it's sounding like out of the microphones, and we will make it very clear when you are hearing one versus the other. So we have that chip difference. The second difference is, and directly related to that, would be the polyphony. We have 256 notes of polyphony over on the ES920. We have 192 notes worth of polyphony on the ES520. What are some other major sound components? Well, we have exactly the same wattage speakers on both of these. It's a pair of 20-watt speakers, which makes them amongst the loudest that you can get for a portable digital piano. But there is a little bit of a difference between the two of them, and it makes me wonder whether there's some Onkyo influence on the 920 that we're not necessarily getting on the 520. So those are the basic sound component differences when you're looking at the 920 versus the 520. Let's listen to those and see whether you at home can tell a difference. We're starting with the default SK grand piano sample on both the 920 and the 520. I haven't adjusted these in any way, shape, or form, and the sound you're getting is also unadjusted. It's completely flat, totally raw. And I'm going to do my best to play exactly the same thing between them so that for people who are really looking for apples to apples, they're not trying to decipher through a bunch of jazz gibberish, which sometimes I put out there. Okay, we'll start with the 920 first. Here we go. Exactly the same sample through a different tone engine on the 520. Here we go. Definitely not the same character. There is certainly some daylight between these two in terms of what it's giving you. Now I'm going to completely flatten this EQ curve out. Now the most exposing parts of the piano usually aren't the middle. It's usually in the bass and in the treble. So let's just have another quick listen to that. So there's something about the fundamental on the 920. It just sounds a little bit fuller. So that's got to be a combination of both the difference in chipset and possibly, even though they're getting the same wattage, something tells me that the speaker quality on the 920 might be slightly different, because there's just this rounded softness to the edges of the sound on the 920. Interesting. Let's take a look at a few other sounds. Let's do the classic EP. Noticing the same thing, there's just still a warmth and a roundness to the sound on this one. Not sure I'd miss it if I didn't have the direct comparison, but it's definitely there. Something that I have noticed on both of these, and it's a little bit of a, an annoyance, a request, and maybe there's a way to shut this off in the settings if there's like an auto screen off that I can just set to an unlimited amount of time. But when you're on patches and this thing goes into, I guess, sort of sleep mode, the display shuts off, if you go to switch a patch, you actually wind up having to press any key to basically get it out of sleep mode and then the patch again. So if I'm on E piano and then I want to get it back to piano 1 and the display is off, I'd have to hit piano 1 once to turn the display back on and then hit piano 1 again to get it there. You get used to it, but I would think that at some point that's probably something they could resolve, because especially if you're in the heat of a moment playing on stage, this display does not go off just because you've stopped using it. It kind of just seems to go off if after a period of time where you haven't hit any keys. So anyway, something to be aware of. The rest of the sounds between both of them are very, very similar. There isn't a huge amount of difference between the offering between one and the other. In fact, for most of those categories, I think it's an exact one-to-one relationship. So it's not the variety, it really is just how it renders out in your ear, the difference in the speakers, and potentially a very subtle difference in the line out because of that chipset. That's all we're going to talk about in terms of the sound comparison. I really want to move on now to the action and then some of the other feature differences between them. But thank you very, very much for joining us for the comparison. I know there's a lot of people who've been waiting in anticipation for these models to hit the market and really trying to do as much research as possible. So we really hope that these videos are giving you what you were looking for. We'll be back in just a second. Here's a few specs on the sound. These two pianos do not have the same actions in them. The 920 has the RH3. This is an action which not only appears in Kawai product, but actually also Nord, and probably another one or two out there in development. It's a very popular action. It has the escapement, it has a triple sensor, and a redesigned sensor strip as of about a year ago, and generally a pretty positive reception out in the market. The 520 has the RHC2, so that's the Responsive Hammer Compact 2. This is the same action that you get in, I believe, the KDP 110. So this has the triple sensor, does not have escapement, and is a little bit more lightweight, slightly shorter key stick than the RH3. So it just feels slightly different, and I think overall just weighs a little bit less, and probably over the long run, looking at a slightly less durable action. You know, all plastic actions have a bit of a durability issue, regardless of what manufacturer you're looking at when you're comparing it to other wooden actions, and especially acoustic actions. These things do have a shelf life, but I think the RH3, I would expect, is going to have a longer shelf life than the RHC2. In terms of their feel and in terms of their weight, one thing I notice, my sense is that the RH2 has a slightly shallower key bed. I know I should probably get a ruler out and really figure this out, but in some sense, you know, the perception of whether it's there or not as a musical factor is in a lot of ways just as important as whether it's actually there or not. That applies to weight, that applies to all kinds of things. You know, the Yamaha P515 is a perfect example of that. I got on the P515 and the first thing I noticed was this feels a little bit heavier. And then I weighed it and then realized it actually weighs out to 80 or 90 grams. However, there's a lot of people who really like the P515, and the fact that it specifically weighs out to 80 or 90 grams doesn't really matter, because the combination of the touch curve and how the dynamic response out of the speakers, most players get a sense that it is on the heavier side, but not, you know, to an unplayable level, regardless of what the weight is. So even if these measured out to have exactly the same key dip, the fact that this one feels a little bit shallower might be relevant to somebody. So there you go. The second thing is the RH3 does feel marginally heavier. The other thing is, of course, I said this one has escapement on its own, whatever, but as I've mentioned in a few more recent videos, the thing I'm really noticing on digitals is when it has the escapement, your ability to control the piano at low dynamic ranges definitely improves. Now, in the individual review of the 520, I mentioned that I got around that difference in sensitivity by actually switching the touch curve to heavy, and I felt that that kind of gave me that sense of control in the lower dynamic range. But, you know, that's not ideal for all playing situations. You don't have to do that on the 920. The key surface on both of these is virtually identical. There's really not much. They both have micro textures on both the black and the white keys. They've got a nice sense of grip. Oh yes, starting to really get a lot of these questions. Let's hear the difference in these actions with the sound completely off for the mechanical down and upstroke. So here is the RH3. And here is the RHC2. So the downstroke on the RHC2 is a little louder than the RH3. And I'd say the upstroke is about the same. I've made mention of this in a couple of my more recent videos. Digital actions have mechanical noise, unavoidable mechanical noise. And compared to a real acoustic action, they're significantly quieter. If you've ever had a chance to actually mute an acoustic piano so that all you are hearing is the mechanical noise, it's significantly loud. There's all sorts of parts that have contact points and frictions and mechanical noise. And so for people who, because of COVID or whatever the reason, have just sort of arrived to the world of digital pianos, it can be a little bit shocking to hear how much mechanical noise the keys actually generate. And if you are residing with somebody, family members, partners, whoever, and they're new to piano as well, and you're sitting there playing with the headphones, you're going to be getting complaints like, holy geez, that's, you know, play more quietly. And they're like, well, how much more quietly can I play? I have headphones on. And yet they're still complaining the mechanical noise of the keys. This is industry-wide. This is not something that's model specific. It's not something that's manufacturer specific. All plastic key actions, in fact, all key actions generally are going to have that mechanical noise. There's really not a whole lot. There are some subtle differences between them. I was comparing a Roland a couple of days ago with the Kawai, and the Roland had a louder downstroke, quieter upstroke. Kawai was quieter on the way down, louder on the way up. It's all just in how the geometry is set up and where they choose to put most of the cushioning. Anyway, so that's all about the action between these two. We're going to come back for a third quick section and talk really about where all of the other feature differences are, which could be the crux of whether one is the right fit for you versus the other. We'll see you in a minute. I think the most unfortunate thing that's going to happen to the ES520 is because it looks virtually the same as the ES920. There's always going to be this expectation that it should have been more like the ES920. Whereas I see the ES520 as just a souped up ES110, rather than a downgraded ES920. Because when we move into the feature section, these two really start to show a gap. Let's start just with the interface. The ES920 has a 4-band EQ, physical EQ built right onto the surface of the machine. The ES520 does not. You can get some basic EQ settings within the Virtual Technician, but nothing's quite as intuitive as being able to go there with your fingers and make some quick adjustments. This is something that Roland brought out. I think they were probably one of the first of this newer generation of portables to have the 3-band EQ. But I remember some of the older Yamahas, like this big gigantic CP300s with a low, mid, high, onboard EQ. And those were always handy. So I'm really happy to see this coming with the Kawai 920. It's not there on the 520. So there's difference number one. Difference number two is the recorder. On the 920, you have the ability to record WAV and MP3 directly onto a USB key. On the 520, that does not exist. You can record SMF onto the key, and you can play back audio that's already on there, but you cannot record audio onto the key. So there is difference number 2. Difference number 3, the 920 has built-in rhythms, and more specifically, built-in auto accompaniment, because they both have rhythms. They both just have drum patterns. But the rhythm section and those rhythms are very similar to what would have been in the ES8. So people who are familiar with the ES8, you've got more or less all the same rhythms packed inside there. You've got rhythm, but it's pretty much just drum rhythms, which can still be quite handy. And in fact, for practicing, drum rhythms are very handy because it beats a metronome, both of which these have, by the way. So there's your third difference, is just drum patterns versus a full band accompanying you. Both have the ability to turn the speaker on and off with a little switch on the back. They both have the 3.5mm stereo input, so you can bring in audio. They both have Bluetooth audio and Bluetooth MIDI, which is really quite handy, for sure. And both are available with matching stands and triple pedal boards or floating triple pedal systems if you are going to be using this in a portable setting, in a portable function. The very last thing that I will make mention of is Kawai's new remote control app, which these are both compatible with. Now, a couple of notes about this, because I've been using it a lot within the last couple of days. And I know that Kawai is actively working on a few tweaks to this. But as it exists right now, and we're in, I guess, March 2021 at the moment, here are my findings about the app. If you upgrade the firmware of the 920 or the 520 to 1.1, not 1.01 or 1.02, but 1.1, they're compatible with the new piano remote app that Kawai has fairly recently released. And that app is fantastic. It's one of the best remote control apps that I have experienced from any of the manufacturers in terms of wrapping all kinds of different functionalities into one. You've got the virtual technician that's in there, so you no longer need to use the external app, Virtual Technician. It completely functions as the remote control to get through all of the other sounds, plus all of the learning material and preloaded material is also accessible there. Basically, it's just a mobile version of the operating system that the CA79 and CA99 use. So like it's exactly the same thing that's in that side panel is now inside your tablet or your smartphone. Now, a couple of things to be aware of. I already mentioned the firmware thing. If you don't do the firmware update, you're not going to be able to use the app. So don't be disappointed. Don't be freaked out. Just, check the version as soon as you get yours and just make sure you're on 1.1. That can be very, very easily done by just holding down piano 2, organ, and strings, and then holding the power button on, and it's going to give you the version code. So that's the first thing to check. Second thing to check is make sure that you don't have more than one Bluetooth MIDI device trying to compete for the connection. Otherwise, it is just a complete gong show. This has been difficult for a lot of manufacturers to sort out. Roland had major problems with this with their Piano Partner 2 app. I know if you had more than one in the vicinity, it just basically scrambled and just didn't know what was going on. So in a lot of homes, it's not going to be a problem because you'll probably only have one. In studios, in showrooms, in schools, this could potentially be a problem if you've got multiple instruments in the area. So just be aware that that app is, at this present moment, going to behave the best if there is just a single device trying to compete for that Bluetooth connection. So there you have it, ES520 and ES920. Very tricky to assess the value because, in my opinion, I think the spread should probably be closer to $400 or $500 rather than the $300 that it is in most markets. I see, as I said, the ES520 as a beefed up ES110. You've got a triple sensor. You're dramatically increasing the power of the speakers. You are upping the processor speed and the quality and the fidelity that's sound coming out with the progressive harmonic imaging chip. And you're getting the option for a floating triple pedal, which is great. So lots going on. I think the ES520 is quite an interesting option. The ES920, for people who are already quite comfortable with where the ES8 was priced, is a killer instrument. I think the move to generally the plastic frame, well, I know, Kawai's already been with this through their action. Anytime you do anything with plastic or anytime with synthetic materials, there's always going to be an emotional element to it that says, they're doing it to cheapen it, they're doing it to save money, or the quality's going down. The very purposeful point of that, because I heard Kawai engineers talking about this 3 years ago when it was on the drawing board, it was weight. It was to save the weight, to get this down into a 30-pound range so that even more people were interested in using the 920 as a gigging keyboard and not something that was just going to sit at home. So they managed to shave like a full 15 pounds off or something. I mean, it was a significant weight savings to go from the ES8 down to the ES920. Same with the ES520. So, I mean, if you can get to both, great. But if anything, I hope this video has just helped to clarify what the differences are. It's up to you, really, to decide if those differences are meaningful to you and which one might be the better fit. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate you being here. If it is the first time that you've seen us here on YouTube and you enjoyed what you saw, you found it useful, then we would love you to subscribe because we'd like to see you back as a regular viewer. Hit that notification bell as well because that means you'll be YouTube will inform you every single time we come out with a new video. My name is Stu Harrison. We will see you again soon.